Turk. The microphone, oh, yes. Can I ask everyone to take their seat, please? Peter. Okay. So I'm delighted to welcome for this session on building a more sovereign Europe, the new French European Minister, Laurence Beaune. Let me say just a few words in introduction. The concept of sovereign Europe, sometimes referred to as strategic autonomy, open strategic autonomy, there are different versions, has been with us, I would say, for about 5 years, when a French president introduced this notion in a famous speech soon after being elected. And I think there's been initially a lot of intellectual debate along the concept, and places like Bruegel, think tanks, people have been discussing what does it mean and what should it imply. And then came COVID crisis. And with the COVID crisis, the notion of sovereignty, the notion of autonomy in Europe, but also in other parts of the world, have suddenly gained much salience. And certainly with the new crisis, with the war in Ukraine, again, the subject of sovereignty in Europe, of strategic autonomy, have come to the fore. So I think it's a very, very good moment, not only, Laurence, because you are a fresh minister and you're bringing a fresh view to this topic. You're coming now from the OECD, so you have an international perspective, you have a European perspective, you have a lot of perspectives on this topic, and it's, as I say, it's an important moment to perhaps rekindle that discussion and understand a little bit what does it really mean, and what are we trying to achieve, and what are we trying to achieve in this moment, in this crucial moment for Europe. So, Laurence, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Jack, and thanks everyone for being here today. It's not only a privilege, but it's also a pleasure for me to speak to you today at the Bruegel Institute, which I think I've known since its inception and is so important in the European debate. And I think it's fair to say that for now almost 20 years, and it doesn't show at all, your input on economic policy issues has really greatly contributed to the European debate. And as a former economist, as a politician now, and a friend of Bruegel, I think we all need to repeat how much your analytical work on many aspects of the European Union has been, and I think still is, not only crucial to the ongoing debates, but it also greatly contributes to bringing about clear, coherent, and constructive changes throughout the European Union. So thank you first. And today, I think even more than what I've said, the challenges generated by the current geopolitical and socio-economic context that we're facing, that will require more than ever the support of your analytical and creative thinking. So you have a heavy task ahead of you. Okay, so what I would like to start off by sharing with you today, it's my conviction, my absolute conviction that the European Union is very rapidly evolving in its nature as a initially economically driven economic power, to being recognized, and you've sort of alluded to it, as an even stronger geopolitical power. And what I would like to explain today is how the EU is changing itself in order to be much better positioned to shape the future of the entire European continent, and in a much more effective way than what it has been doing so far. And I not only want to highlight the areas where the EU is profoundly changing itself, but I also would like to illustrate how this transition is being shared by many of our European partners, hopefully all, and including Germany. You've seen the speech that Olaf Scholz has delivered in Prague on August 29, and this is very important to us. Okay, but let me first remind you, sometimes we do not congratulate ourselves enough in Europe, so I would like to remind you the most recent significant progress which have been made by the European Union throughout the various crisis episodes, and there are many great actors of this in the room. So as you all very well know, there was the great financial crisis, followed by the Eurozone sovereign crisis, which has led to an extension of the solidarity of EU countries through the creation of the European Stability Mechanism. One of the actors is trying to hide himself there. An extension of monetary policy tools. There's another one at the back as well. And a vast soft revolution, I think, of our financial regulation. And again, here tribute to Bruegel, but tribute also to all the European actors. Now, more recently, first in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the European Union and all the member states have, I think, again proven their ability to be agile and flexible, to be capable of protecting the labor market, companies, people, pulling on all its policy string, whether it's competition, job retention schemes, and ultimately the creation of a common budgetary tool. And I'm sure many of you will remember how that was seen as a non-reachable sort of heaven with NGEU. And I think we should ponder that the NGEU will change the economic structure of the European Union for generations to come, because it will foster the energy and digital transition, but it's also created much more resilient economic structures. And then we even had the foundation of a Europe of health, an area where the EU had few, if any, prerogatives before. Now, because you want me to come to the war, and since last February, the European Union again, I think, and it's important to insist on this, with remarkable speed and remarkable force, in conjunction with the G7, has been responding to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And first, I think we should repeat and we should make absolutely no mistakes here. The European sanctions are actually profoundly impacting Russia, not only today, but also for the future, in particular, by depriving Russia of our technologies in all industrial areas. And believe me, they will continue to do so in the long run, and that is where the most effect will be seen. Having said that, I think we do have to acknowledge that Russia's aggression is taking its toll on European citizens, and particularly through the energy market, which Russia is manipulating. And this is why across all EU countries, governments are deploying financial shields to protect people and business activities most affected by the crisis. It's also because of that that the Czech presidency has called for an emergency energy council for this Friday to strengthen and support the EU and its citizens. It's also something that we should not forget, that what we're trying to do here, what's at stake, it's our values, it's democracy, it's freedom, it's the rule of law. And that's why what I would like to discuss and demonstrate with you today is how the EU is on track to mutate from an economically driven integrated power to a geopolitical one. And the objective is first and foremost to protect those values. So let me focus a minute on the values and on this. You mentioned the French president who's been here for more than 5 years now. With his first speech, the Sorbonne speech, he mentioned the two pillars of our common European values, and that's democracy and the rule of law. The EU itself has a Charter for Fundamental Rights, which is laying out what these values are. But I do think that we should not take them for granted. And as I was mentioning now, Russia has launched a war not only on Ukraine and its people, creating a massive humanitarian disaster, but it has also launched a war on our democratic value and the rule of law, which is underpinning our freedom and our fundamental human rights. And it is very, very serious. So what is the EU doing? First, since 2020, the European Commission has been turning these words into a published factual annual report, which is focusing on examining our institutions, how they protect our justice systems, the freedom of press, the integrity of the electoral process, and how to address corruption when it exists in some member states. And this is helping every single of us to reform in order to consolidate our institutions, because our institutions are, if we were to do a stress test of our democracy, it will have to go through the institution. And what I believe now is also very important for you all to keep in mind is that the EU is also leveraging on its available instrument to safeguard these values. I'm sure you're all aware that France has been supporting the use of Article 7 to protect these values again. And as you know, this article aims at ensuring that all member states respect the common rules, including the rule of law. There is a sanction mechanism which allows the Council to suspend certain rights deriving from the treaty for member states if a serious breach persists. And we have been using this Article 7. And the German Chancellor has reiterated his support in the 29th of September speech to this mechanism. And more largely, there is actually the Council for General Affairs, which is monitoring each member state situation, and including the one which are under breach of this article. So here I think we can say that the EU demonstrates that there is not and there will never be any tolerance or compromises for those who internally, as well as externally, who seek to undermine these values. Now, moving towards resiliency, not only it's based on institution, but I think for the immediate future, our common resiliency and solidarity must be the weapon to answer Russia's war against this value. And for the longer run, for maintaining sustainable peace and democracy, we will have to strengthen the EU as a geopolitical power. And which is why I think your question was particularly relevant. We have been talking about it, and the question now is, what do we do about it if we want to protect those values? Okay, I'm going to go through three, I think, key things there, four, in fact. First, defense. As you know, there was the Versailles Summit, and there was a call for strengthening our defense capacities. And again, this is not only word, it's about common purchasing. It's about expanding common military assistance to third countries. It's not only France, it's not only some of the initiative of the EU, it's also the German Chancellor, who has recently added a proposal for a European Defense Ministers' Council and military headquarters. It's also the EU. The EU is reinforcing, enhancing, and coordinating national and European investment in its defense capabilities. So what are we talking about? To be very concrete, we are talking about the Joint Armament Procurement Instrument, which has been developed by Commissioner Breton. We are talking about the establishment of a European rapid deployment capacity. And we're talking about the joint armament programs by 2025. I don't think 10 years ago anyone would have imagined Europe would be capable of doing this in the room. I don't want to do a test. Raise your hand if you thought that would happen. Okay, thanks. And my last word on this, actually, and on European defense. This is not creative, an alternative to NATO. And I think it's important to repeat it because there has been question about this. On the contrary, that the EU takes more responsibility for its own security and gives itself the means to do it, which is the purpose of something you've heard, which is the strategic compass. This is to act jointly with NATO. And if I had to give an example, it's the initiatives on military mobility, which uses EU logistics support, EU logistics to support NATO. And in the end, I think if we can work together like that, it will make us stronger, it will make our defense stronger, more efficient, and more effective. Now, enough of defense, because very often I'm asked, why do you talk about defense first? Well, because we are at war somehow. Industrial sovereignty, because there will be no strong geopolitical power without strong economics. And when I'm in economics, you can think about energy, you can think about digital, you can think about food and agriculture and industrial supply chains. And I'll be quick, but I will just give a few concrete examples, again, to show that this is not a wishful list or wishful thinking, but this is actually happening. So first, and that's thanks to a large extent to Next Generation EU, we have a lot of European-wide programs building very strong capabilities in the area of digital technology, health, hydrogen, and semiconductors. I mentioned food security. We also have the Common Agricultural Policy, which has recently been evolving to take into account the effect of the war on food security, and also keeping in mind our environmental targets. And then I mentioned supply chain resilience, and we have forthcoming proposals on critical raw materials and the single market emergency instrument that the EU is strengthening, and the monitoring of supply chain resilience. But I think the most concrete things, and the one everyone in town, including in this room, I guess, and on this stage, is thinking about, and it's energy independence. So we are already walking away from our collective dependence on Russian oil and gas. If you've read the latest IMF projection, they were reporting that the European infrastructure and global supply chain have already coped with a 60% decline in Russian gas deliveries between July 21 and July 22. 60%, 6-0. That's just enormous. And not only it's massive, but there are more savings in the making. So now you all know that on the 9th of September, the Energy Council will discuss how to cope with additional reductions and with many options on the table to help our resilience, including the use of price capping, common purchasing, and for the future, the decoupling of electricity from gas prices. So everything's on the table for discussion, which I think is very healthy. And it also shows that European solidarity is once again being mobilized in a very effective way. And it will be operational for the upcoming winter seasons. So we are not talking about taking months and years, we're talking about now. Now that's not enough, obviously, we must go further because our dependency on fossil fuel must very, very quickly disappear. And as you discussed this morning, the energy crisis is a climate opportunity. And we will have, by the end of this year, the trialogue about the Fit for 55 package, which was agreed by the Council during the French presidency of the EU. And I think you must be impressed by three things. First, it has been agreed, and as you know, it was not always easy. Second, it will be discussed in the trialogue by the end of this year. So again, we're not talking about taking years to agree on something. And third, I think it will be really the key to developing new decarbonized energy production capacity quickly. And here again, some member states are taking steps as well. And when I mentioned at the beginning that I wanted to show how the EU was moving and how there was a strong cooperation between France and Germany, I'm sure you will have noticed that in the Prague speech of Olaf Scholz, he was also calling for a true internal energy market, relying on extensive R&D and infrastructure investment. Now, before you're coming naive, I've just mentioned this will require large investment in energy as well as in defense. And EU fiscal rules will obviously have to evolve to support these investments. And I'm sure you had an interesting debate this morning with Agnès Benassi and Thomas Sarenho that will fuel our thinking on this. Now, the nearly last thing, the third thing I want to mention is geopolitical power, because that's really what we are discussing today. And obviously, for this to happen and for us to live in peace on our continent, the EU cannot live in isolation. It's not only about the EU, it's beyond the EU. So the EU has to share its values, it has to share its security and its economic strength on a much broader scale. So there was the very historic decision to grant candidate status to Ukraine and Moldavia, to launch accession negotiation with North Macedonia and Albania. I think we now need to go further. That's our strategic interest, to anchor the Balkans as firmly as possible to the European Union. So there was, and it was in the Council conclusion of last year, the European political community that President Macron has launched. Again, on the 29th of September, I noted that Olaf Scholz supported this European political community. Now, what it is and what it isn't, since we have many questions about this, and I could see Yeromin suddenly bending forward. So first, it's not a substitute and it's not an alternative to enlargement. And I think everyone should keep that in mind, but it's quite the opposite. If I was using very sober talking point, I would say that it corresponds to our urgent need of being united in our effort to safeguard our common values. If I want to be very pragmatic, I will tell you that accession is difficult, it's technical, it's not political, it's tough on the countries. And they have to take something and adopt it. It's not on equal footing either. Obviously, it grants something fantastic that is belonging to the EU, but it's a tough path. The country that did it the fastest is Slovenia, and it took 5 years. We cannot afford 5, 7, or 10 years of frustration for the countries who wish to join the EU. We have to help them and to show the population that being a friend of the EU actually delivers benefit quickly, delivers investment, it delivers cooperation, and it's allowing to share values. Basically, we have to respond to what Russia and China are doing. And that is what the European political community is about. And one thing which is essential as well to respond to this frustration, it's equal footing. We also have to adopt, listen those countries when they have something better than what we do. And for example, I can think about Ukraine and cyber attacks. They're probably the best country equipped on the continent to resist this. And we could probably benefit from what they have to teach us. And that is what the European political community will be about. Now, just to make it real as well, the first meeting of the European political community will take place on the margin of the Council on the 6th of October. So this is in the moving. I will finish with a quick word on governance, because I'm going to preempt some questions. So obviously, everything I've talked about will require reforming the European treaties. And again, I think the French position has been very clear in this regard. I'm never sure whether it's a very French way of saying things or whether it translates well, but what we say is no totems and no taboos. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. We believe that the EU must reform itself to be able to operate more efficiently and effectively in a larger Europe. We are very grateful, again, for the German Chancellor's word in this direction. We're also very grateful to the Czech presidency, which is currently initiating preliminary discussion on these topics between the 27. And to be a little more concrete, the discussion regards institutional governance and decision-making as well, like the unanimity rules in certain areas of common European security policy or in tax matters. So there will be debates, there will be disagreement, and I'm sure we're all aware of this. But open dialogue, aiming at seeking agreements that will raise Europe's ability to act more effectively and efficiently, I think for us is a question of survival. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Laurence. I think that was a very interesting speech, very concrete. Indeed, in this discussion that can be sometimes a bit fuzzy, I think you really nailed it down to a number of concrete elements. And before I ask Jeremy to maybe pose some questions, let me just make a couple of comments, if I may. First comment, and I will start with the end of your speech on the institutional reform. I was a bit disappointed. I was a bit disappointed that at the same European Council, where the decision was taken unanimously to grant Ukraine and Moldova, what you refer to as candidate status, which was by no means an obvious decision, right? If we had gone back 2 or 3 months before, it was not necessarily in the cards. So I think it was an important decision and a quick decision, a quick response to the request by those countries. So I think that is very, very positive. So I'd say good point. What I was personally disappointed, and I think a number of people in Brussels, or in the Brussels bubble, were disappointed, is that at the same time as we are launching enlargement discussions, there was not also a decision by the European Council on the deepening. That is on the institutional reform that you referred to. After all, we have just concluded, Europe has just concluded a conference on the future of Europe. By the way, also an idea of President Macron, and I think a very, very useful idea. And I think that there's been a lot of thinking, not just in think tanks and with citizens, but also in instances like the European Parliament about this. And I think there was a hope that this would lead to something, something concrete, an IGC. And some had hoped to link the two at the European Council. That would say, yes, you know, we need the widening, but we need the deepening, and the two processes need to go in parallel, need to reinforce one another. So that's one sort of disappointment, and I think it would be interesting to hear from you whether this is still in the cards. You know, where's the conference on the future of Europe leading to in terms of an institutional process? That's one issue. A second issue, we had a very intense discussion among Bruegel Fellows a week ago, a week and one day ago, on the EPC idea. And I personally was a skeptic in that discussion. A skeptic at this moment. If it had happened a year ago, I would have applauded with two hands, because I do think that indeed we do need in Europe, beyond the EU, between the EU and its neighborhood, and including the UK, as President Macron had put forward. There's UK, there is Ukraine, certainly, there is Turkey. There are a number of countries that, you know, we need to have a political dialogue. And I would have said, if it come a year ago, I said, fantastic idea. When it came this semester, partly as response to Ukraine, then I started to ask myself, well, how does it respond to Ukraine? Does it respond to Ukraine? Does it try to respond to the bigger problem, to the Turkeys and to the UK? I felt it falls a bit in between. Okay, it's a bit of both, or it's maybe neither. So I got worried, and so I in that discussion that we had at Bruegel, I concluded the discussion from my side by saying that I wish it had been a European Economic Community that was offered. Isn't that what Ukraine will need? Will find, you know, you're talking about something concrete for citizens. Okay, cyber. Okay, cyber is important, and as you said, you know, cyber is something that Europe can learn, certainly, I have no doubt, from Ukraine. But citizens of Ukraine are not going to see much of discussions that are going to take place on cyber. Right? This is not going to change their life to think, aha, Europe is really taking steps towards a process which is a difficult process, right? Enlargement towards Ukraine is by no means easy. You said 5 years, it's not realistic. I agree with that. I mean, I think Ukrainians would agree on that. So they will need to see concrete steps, okay? So, and the concrete steps more on the economic side than on the political side. Isn't the political going to be a show in Brussels? And yes, we're going to see headlines, but are citizens going to see something? Those are my two comments or questions. I don't know whether you want to I didn't say respond, but comment on them.
I will comment. Thank you. Thanks for the remark, and thanks for the way you've been sharing them. So I think I will start with your last comment about the European political community. And I won't comment as an economist on time consistency of your thought process, but there are two things which I think are essential to understand. Three. The first one is it's very important for the country outside, and even more for accession country, to be considered politically for themselves and for their public opinion as on the same footing as a EU head of state or government. So as intellectual, as experts, we may dismiss the fact that you are on the picture with your peer, but as a politician, this is very important. And it's not me saying this, actually, it's accession countries. So the political aspect should not be neglected, and this aspect I think is important. I agree with you that it has to go hand in hand with concrete stuff. I gave cyber as an example of equal footing, but obviously this is not reduced to that. I think there are in fact two types of areas where bilateral or plurilateral cooperation are considered. Security and defense, and that's obviously very important for many of those countries, whether it's in the southeast of Europe or whether we want to cooperate with the north of Europe. That completely makes sense. There are also economic cooperation, but you have to take into account that it can. I personally think that there should be a distinction with the internal market. Internal market is accession. Now, what speaks the most to people? Roaming. I'm sure if there are a few British in the room, they understand what I mean, right? Their phone bill has just exploded. But roaming is very close to internal market regulation. So I'm not saying it cannot be done, but what I'm saying is this will need some time to see what can be done there. But it's precisely this type of things. It can be energy connectivity. It can be transport. It can be digital connectivity. But it is also important, if we talk about politically being on the same podium, that it's not only EU countries explaining things to others, but it's EU country receiving from others. Hence the example of cyber. It can be different with the UK or something else. And I think it is even more important now that we have accession countries for which we know the accession path is long, at least, and sometimes painful. On the COFE and enlargement. So on COFE, there will be a restitution, there will be things. I just want to say two things. First, I don't want to get into the way of the State of Union speech, so I'm not going to give a date or anything. But I think it's very important, yes, that there is that we get back to people and explain, so there will be something. Let me say as well, two surprising things from COFE. First, at least a third of what citizens are asking already exists. So we have a communication problem. Us, and please help us, but we do need to talk about it more. Second, a lot of measures, if not the vast majority, can be done without treaty changes. Third, when we talk about treaty changes, I think what is important is what are you trying to achieve? Okay, where do you want to change? How do you want to do it? And here, let me say two things. I don't think we should start with the institutional without asking what for. So yes, we will need to reform. We will need to reform probably the way our institutions function, and we can think about all the institutions of the EU, but we're not going to decide that in the 1 year of work or in 2 months' time. That's the first thing. There may be a convention. If that doesn't work, we have to think about the sectors where we need to do changes. So a little more pragmatism and a little less of a grand mess, but to really say what are we trying to achieve.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laurence. Jérôme, your turn.
Thank you so much, and apologies for being late. It's fantastic to have you here in your new role, and congratulations. So you're getting 2 discussions for the price of 1, clearly. So I'm going to just pick up on 3 points. Basically, I'm in broad agreement with your points, and so I guess this is mostly to show that I've understood your points rather than criticizing them, but provide some nuance. So my 3 points are: first, on the central theme of your speech, to discuss and demonstrate how the EU is on track to mutate from an economically driven integrated power to a geopolitical one. So that is the central theme, and of course you mean it not just in a predictive way, but you also support it, right? It's normative, and so it does sound a little scary, right? From economically driven integrated to a geopolitical one, and so my first reaction was, whoa, this is scary. And so then I basically convinced myself perhaps it's not that's scary. And so I think that there are two arguments. I mean, the basis for why it's scary is because of essentially the sort of Ricardian guns versus butter trade-off, right? We have, in a sense, a production possibility frontier. We can focus on, provision of economic goods. We can focus on external strength, and there's maybe some trade-off. Simply because some resources will have to be allocated differently if you emphasize more your geopolitical strength, and maybe something will be lost, which makes the EU inherently attractive. So I convinced myself that that's not necessarily the case, and I think this is for two reasons. One is we are way below the efficient frontier in the EU, right? There is so much that we can do, particularly on the defense side, and on the procurement side, and of course on internal market energy union issues, that does not create a trade-off. It's a pure efficiency gain, and in a sense, these are issues that we have been struggling with for decades. We have wanted to do them for a while, and like always in the progress of the EU, we didn't have a sufficiently deep crisis to get our act together. Now now is the moment, right? And so it's sort of a win-win. So this is one point, and then the other point is, like my friend Nicolas Véran reminded me, in a sense, your vision of Europe is part of the original vision. There's this fantastic quote from Jean Monnet from 1954, which you must all know, and I'm going to take the incredible risk to read it to you in French. This is from his departing speech in front of the Autorité de la CECA in November of 54, and he says, "Nos pays," and he means, of course, European countries, "sont devenus trop petits pour le monde actuel, à l'échelle des moyens techniques modernes, à la mesure de l'Amérique et de la Russie d'aujourd'hui, de la Chine et de l'Inde de demain. L'unité des peuples européens réunis dans les États-Unis d'Europe et les moyens de relever leur niveau de vie et de maintenir la paix. Elle est le grand espoir et la chance de notre époque." So the fantastic thing in this quote is how he blends essentially the economic and the geopolitical dimension, and of course the incredible farsightedness. Now, I mean, he talks about the Americans, the Russians, and then the future Chinese. And I mean, this is 1954. It's just a stunning quote. So I wanted to get this off my chest. Okay, then my other 2 points are small points. So on the industrial sovereignty, you know how economists like me, you and me, feel a little bit about this. We get sort of slightly nervous about this stuff because we think of it as being about self-sufficiency, maybe sort of some grand industrial policy that we don't like, and about sort of fortress Europe, right? And so in that, there's always a risk that it will become like that, particularly on the supply chains, right? So here I think the trick is, and I think you do this well in your speech, to emphasize this is not how it is meant. This is mostly about strengthening internal markets, particularly energy union. Maybe energy independence is not the right word, because we will continue importing energy, I think, for some time. But it's definitely about energy security and about resilience of supply chains. And this is not inconsistent with free trade, open trade. And so I think this is a very important message to preserve. Also, one message that Sabine Weyand very effectively made in her intervention this morning, but I think we completely agree on that. And finally, and this is the area I know least about this European political community, I guess I would so in the debate that we had at Bruegel the other day, I was sort of somewhere in the middle between Jean and André, and that's a great place to be. You want to be in the middle between Jean and André. So I had sympathies. I have great sympathies for this, but the big risk, right? The reason why you get these gut reactions, particularly from Eastern and Central Europe, against this, is that it is viewed as yet another attempt to offer some sort of second-class citizenship to countries that you ultimately do not want to let in, right? That is the big risk. And you have preempted this in your speech by saying this is not a substitute to enlargement, right? So you're not guilty of this, but one nevertheless needs to be very careful. And so the way that I would frame this is that this is a complement of enlargement whose purpose is, as you yourself said in your remarks, to deliver some of the benefits of full membership before full membership actually arises. Now, it's probably not a very politically correct analogy to make, but for me, the analogy is with a frequent flyer program of an airline that offers you, you know, super platinum status after 10 years. And of course, no one's going to want to do that, right? You want to get to silver and gold and have some benefits along the way. And I also agree that political benefits can be part of the package, where I think the difficulty comes, and you address this in your reply to André, is that they cannot be, I think, the only component of the package. There needs to be something tangible on the economic front. And that's bloody difficult for the reason that you have stated, but also because in cases like Ukraine, for example, we've already given them full trade integration, right? So it is hard, maybe not, I don't know. It is difficult to actually figure out how to go beyond what we have tried to do for the MENA region, right, in the Arab Spring, right? We try to very actively integrate them through trade. We try to do the same thing for Ukraine. So how can one go beyond this in a meaningful way so as to not make it just about a political community? Let me stop.
Laurence, you have a little bit of time to answer. I think we should, if you don't mind, it's 2:50 and it's a super interesting discussion, and we are really grateful to have you to discuss this. But there is another session at 3 o'clock, actually one that I'm also chair. So I have a little bit of a problem here. So I would say if you can do this in 5-6 minutes now, I think that would be really great.
Sure. Are you trying to say that I speak too long, too much? No, I'm joking.
It's hard to discuss all of those matters. No, not at all.
Okay, I'll be quick. I think, well, first, Yaomina, I should turn the compliment. It's fantastic to have you here, and congratulations on this. It's great for us, for Bruegel, and hopefully for you. Let me start with your first point, but I think I'll be very fast because you've responded to this. What I was trying to say is the EU has a sound economic basis. Of course, we can improve. We all know and have written, first and foremost, Erkki about banking union, or Peter, capital union. And there are a lot of things we can do to complete, or I've seen Agnes also has written a lot about this. But this is a sound basis which can be pursued. Where we do need to accelerate and put more effort is on the geopolitical side. So yeah, it's complementary and it goes together. And since you started doing quotes, I'm going to do a French quote for this, which is "Le mieux est l'ennemi du." I know that's for another one, but I'll get back to this. On your second point about industrial autonomy, thanks for highlighting. Thanks for reading my thoughts. It's not about security. It's about It's not about independence. It's really about security. You're right. I have one example in mind, which is renewable energy. We will need materials from elsewhere. It is not something we can do completely from scratch, but we need to be, as you know, much more diversified and realistic in what we do. And I do believe that energy security is energy transition. That is the same thing, never oppose them. On geopolitics and EPC, I have my Jean Monnet quote, but in English. So nothing is possible without men, but nothing is lasting without institutions. And I really think we should keep that in mind as a compass in what we do with the rule of law and with democracy. You know, Since I don't want to be too long, the one thing I will add to what I was saying before is you don't trust enough the countries outside the European Union, because the countries outside the European Union today are the one who came to us with the most interesting and detailed proposals for the European political community. And that gives me lots of hope that we're going to be able to build up this community this time as a complement to enlargement.
Thank you, Laurence. We are really grateful for you to have taken the time. So grateful that you took the time in your busy schedule to share your thoughts. And as I said, it's a very, very crucial moment for Europe. And I think Bruegel is certainly a place where we can push forward ideas, but we are grateful to have people like you to interact with and to reflect with. Thank you, Laurence. Apologies to the audience that we did not get a chance, give you a chance to open the floor. Thank you, Laurence.